The November wind cut through the chain-link fence surrounding Jefferson Middle School like a blade, carrying with it the scent of industrial smoke from the nearby auto plants that had once made Detroit the Motor City. Marcus Thompson pulled his second-hand jacket tighter around his thin frame as he hurried across the cracked asphalt courtyard, his worn backpack bouncing against his back with each step. Inside that bag, carefully wrapped in a plastic grocery store sack to protect it from the Michigan drizzle, was his most prized possession, a hardcover copy of To Kill a Mockingbird that he'd found at a garage sale for 50 cents. At 13, Marcus was already 6 feet tall but weighed barely 130 pounds, his gangly limbs making him appear fragile despite his height. His dark skin stretched taut over sharp cheekbones, and behind wire-rimmed glasses held together with electrical tape, his brown eyes held an intelligence that seemed to burn brighter than the dim fluorescent lights in Jefferson's hallways. His hair was cut short, practical rather than stylish. His mother, Sandra, cut it herself every 3 weeks with clippers she'd bought at the dollar store. "Yo, walking dictionary!" The voice cut through the morning air like a whip crack. Marcus's shoulders tensed instinctively. He didn't need to turn around to know that Jerome Patterson and his crew were approaching. Jerome was everything Marcus wasn't: popular, athletic, and blessed with the kind of natural charisma that made teachers smile and girls giggle. But beneath that charm lay a cruelty that Marcus had come to know intimately over the past 2 years. Marcus quickened his pace, but Jerome's voice followed him like a shadow. "Where you going, Shakespeare? Got another love letter to write to your girlfriend? Oh wait, I forgot. Books can't love you back." The laughter that erupted from Jerome's friends, Tyler, Deshaun, and Marcus's former friend Kevin, felt like ice water in his veins. Kevin's laughter hurt the most. They had been inseparable in elementary school, building forts out of library books and dreaming of adventures. But middle school had changed Kevin, pulled him into Jerome's orbit where being smart was social suicide and loyalty was a luxury they couldn't afford. Marcus finally reached the heavy metal doors of Jefferson Middle School, their green paint peeling like diseased skin. The building itself was a monument to municipal neglect. Built in the 1960s during Detroit's glory days, it now stood as a testament to how quickly things could fall apart. Water stains bloomed across the ceiling tiles like dark flowers, and the lockers bore scars from decades of frustrated students who had taken out their anger on cold metal. In Mrs. Henderson's English class, Marcus slid into his usual seat in the front row, far from the back corner where Jerome held court. The classroom smelled of chalk dust and broken dreams, its walls adorned with motivational posters that had faded to the point where reach for the stars looked more like a death threat than inspiration. Mrs. Henderson, a woman in her 50s whose passion for literature had been slowly eroded by budget cuts and indifferent students, stood at the blackboard, writing vocabulary words in her careful cursive. "Today we're going to discuss character development in Of Mice and Men," she announced, her voice carrying the weariness of someone who had explained the same concepts to thousands of students who would rather be anywhere else. "Can anyone tell me what makes Lenny a sympathetic character despite his actions?" Marcus's hand shot up immediately, his enthusiasm undimmed by the collective groan that arose from his classmates. "Lenny represents the destruction of innocence in a harsh world," he began, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. "Steinbeck uses him to show how society fails to protect its most vulnerable members. And, man, nobody asked for a whole dissertation," Jerome interrupted, his voice dripping with mock admiration. "Save some smart for the rest of us, Professor Thompson." The class erupted in snickers, and Marcus felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment. Even Mrs. Henderson seemed tired of defending him, simply nodding and moving on to safer territory. Marcus sank lower in his seat, his moment of passion extinguished like a candle in the wind. Lunch was always the worst part of Marcus's day. The cafeteria was a social ecosystem, as rigid and unforgiving as any prison yard, with invisible boundaries that everyone understood but no one discussed. The athletes claimed the tables near the windows, the popular girls held court by the vending machines, and Marcus ate alone at a small table near the kitchen, where the sound of clanging pots and pans provided a soundtrack to his isolation. He unwrapped the peanut butter and jelly sandwich his mother had made that morning, grape jelly because it was on sale at the corner store, and opened his copy of To Kill a Mockingbird to chapter 7. The book's pages were yellowed with age, and someone had written notes in the margins in pencil, observations about Scout's character development that Marcus found almost as interesting as Harper Lee's original text. "Reading again, Marcus?" The voice was softer than Jerome's, tinged with what might have been genuine curiosity. Marcus looked up to see Aaliyah Washington standing beside his table, her lunch tray balanced carefully in her hands. Aaliyah was one of the few students at Jefferson who seemed to exist outside the rigid social hierarchy, not popular enough to sit with the in crowd, but confident enough not to care. "It's a good book," Marcus replied quietly, marking his place with a finger. "Have you read it?" Aaliyah shrugged and sat down across from him without invitation. "Started it last year, never finished. My mom says it's important," but she trailed off, taking a bite of the cafeteria's mystery meat sandwich. "Why do you like reading so much? I mean, really, not the answer you give teachers." Marcus considered the question seriously, as he did most things. Outside the cafeteria windows, he could see the skeletal remains of an abandoned factory, its broken windows like dead eyes staring back at him. "Books are honest," he said finally. "They don't pretend to be something they're not to make you like them. And when you read about characters overcoming impossible things," he gestured vaguely at the cafeteria around them, "it makes you think maybe you can too." The Detroit Public Library's Central Branch stood like a fortress of hope on Woodward Avenue, its neoclassical columns and limestone facade defying the urban decay that had claimed so many of the city's once proud buildings. Built in 1921 during the city's golden age, it had weathered the storms of economic collapse, white flight, and municipal bankruptcy with the quiet dignity of an institution that understood its true purpose. For Marcus Thompson, walking up those wide stone steps every afternoon after school felt like entering a different world entirely. The heavy oak doors opened with a satisfying weight, and Marcus was immediately enveloped by the familiar scent of old paper, binding glue, and the faint lavender cleaning solution that Mrs. Carmen Rodriguez used religiously throughout the building. The main reading room stretched before him like a cathedral of knowledge, its vaulted ceilings rising 40 feet above rows of polished wooden tables where afternoon light streamed through tall windows, casting geometric patterns across open books and bent heads. Miss Rodriguez looked up from the circulation desk as Marcus approached, her warm brown eyes crinkling at the corners with genuine affection. At 58, she had been the head librarian for nearly 2 decades, watching the neighborhood change around her while maintaining the sanctuary with fierce determination. Her salt and pepper hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and she wore the same style of cardigan she'd favored for years. Today's was forest green, complementing her olive complexion. "Hola, Marcus," she called softly, mindful of the library's sacred quiet. "How was school today, mijo?" Marcus set his backpack down on the desk's worn surface, the sound muffled by years of accumulated scratches and ring stains from countless coffee cups. "Same as always, Mrs. R," he replied, using the nickname she'd allowed him after their first month of daily conversations. "Jerome and his friends made sure everyone knew I was the weird kid who actually reads the assigned books, Mrs." Rodriguez's expression darkened slightly. She had grown up in southwest Detroit, where her Mexican immigrant parents had worked double shifts at the Ford Rouge plant to put her through college. She understood intimately the complicated dynamics of survival in a place where being too smart, too different, or too ambitious could make you a target. "Y tu mamá? How is Sandra doing with her classes?" "She's tired," Marcus admitted, settling into the chair beside her desk that had become his unofficial spot. "The nursing program is kicking her butt, and she's still working nights at the hospital cleaning rooms. She fell asleep in her textbook again last night." His voice carried a mixture of pride and worry that Mrs. Rodriguez recognized, the burden of a child who understood too much about adult struggles. Sandra Thompson was 29 years old, having had Marcus when she was just 16. She dropped out of high school, but earned her GED through night classes, and now she was pursuing her licensed practical nurse certification at Detroit Community College. The single mother and son lived in a one-bedroom apartment on 8 Mile Road, where Sandra slept on a pull-out couch so Marcus could have the bedroom for studying. "Your mother is a warrior," Mrs. Rodriguez said firmly, her slight accent adding weight to her words. "And so are you, even if those boys at school are too stupid to see it. Speaking of which," she reached beneath her desk and pulled out a slim volume with a familiar red cover. "I found something I think you'll appreciate." Marcus's eyes widened as he recognized the book, The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. "But this is a first edition," he whispered, handling it like a holy relic. "Mrs. R, I can't—" "It's not leaving the library," she interrupted gently. "But you can read it here, in our special collection room. I think you'll find it relevant to your current situation." The special collection room was Mrs. Rodriguez's pride and joy, a climate-controlled space behind the main desk where the library's most valuable books were housed. She unlocked the door with an old brass key and gestured Marcus inside. The room was small but perfectly appointed, with a single reading table beneath a green banker's lamp and walls lined with glass-fronted bookcases containing first editions, rare manuscripts, and local historical documents. As Marcus settled into the leather reading chair, the nicest piece of furniture he'd ever sat in, Mrs. Rodriguez lingered in the doorway. "Marcus," she said carefully, "I've been thinking about something. Have you ever considered entering a writing contest?" Marcus looked up from the book, his finger marking his place at the first page. "Writing contest. The Michigan Young Authors Competition," she explained, stepping fully into the room and closing the door behind her. "It's open to students, grades 6 through 12. The deadline is February 15th, and the winner gets a $1,000 scholarship and publication in the state literary magazine." The idea hit Marcus like a physical force. $1,000 would mean his mother could cut back her hours, maybe sleep in an actual bed instead of on the couch. Publication would mean that somewhere, somehow, people would read his words and maybe understand that there was more to him than the awkward kid who got shoved into lockers. "What would I write about?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Rodriguez smiled, the expression transforming her entire face. "What do you know better than anyone else, mijo? Write about what it's like to be you. Write about finding light in dark places. Write about the power of books to save a person's soul." Over the next 2 hours, Marcus lost himself in The Outsiders, finding in Ponyboy Curtis a kindred spirit, another young man who saw the world differently, who understood that being sensitive didn't make you weak, and who believed that people were more complex than the roles society assigned them. When Mrs. Rodriguez gently reminded him that the library would be closing soon, Marcus felt like he was being awakened from a beautiful dream. As he packed his things, Mrs. Rodriguez handed him a composition notebook with a marbled black and white cover. "For your story," she said simply, "start tonight. Write for 30 minutes before bed, every night until February. Don't worry about making it perfect, just make it true." Walking home through the gathering dusk, Marcus clutched the notebook against his chest like armor. The streetlights were beginning to flicker on along Woodward Avenue, casting pools of yellow light across the cracked sidewalks. In the distance, he could see the abandoned Packard plant, its broken windows like dead eyes staring out at a city that had forgotten how to dream. But Marcus was dreaming now, bigger than he ever had before. The February wind howled through the cracks in Marcus's bedroom window, rattling the glass panes that had been painted shut so many times they might as well have been sealed permanently. He sat hunched over his small wooden desk, a yard sale find his mother had painted white to hide the scratches, with 3 composition notebooks spread before him like battle plans. The marbled cover of the first notebook was worn smooth from handling, its pages filled with his cramped handwriting that grew smaller toward the end of each line as he fought to capture every thought before it escaped. 4 months had passed since Mrs. Rodriguez had given him that first notebook, and Marcus had filled it completely, then a second, and was now halfway through a third. His story had evolved from a simple narrative about a boy who loved books into something deeper, a raw, honest exploration of what it meant to be different in a world that punished difference. to find hope in hopelessness, and to believe in a future that seemed impossible from where he sat. His mother's voice drifted through the thin apartment walls from the living room where she was studying for her nursing exam. Pathophysiology of the cardiovascular system, she muttered to herself, the medical terminology sounding foreign in their small space, filled with second-hand furniture and dreams deferred. Sandra had been accepted into the LPN program after 2 years of prerequisite courses, working nights at Detroit General Hospital to pay for textbooks that cost more than their monthly grocery budget. Marcus glanced at the alarm clock beside his bed, 11:47 p.m. His mother would be asleep on the pull-out couch in less than an hour, and she'd be up again at 5:30 a.m. to catch the bus to her clinical rotation. He had learned to be quiet during these late-night writing sessions, tiptoeing to the kitchen for water and keeping his desk lamp angled so the light wouldn't seep under his bedroom door. The story he was crafting felt like bleeding onto paper. Every word was pulled from somewhere deep inside him, from the place where he kept all the hurt and hope tangled together like Christmas lights that had been stored too hastily. He wrote about Jefferson Middle School without naming it, about teachers who had given up and students who had learned that cruelty was a form of currency. He wrote about Mrs. Rodriguez without naming her, about the way knowledge could be a lifeline thrown to a drowning person. But mostly, he wrote about the library, that sanctuary where the outside world couldn't touch him, where he could be Marcus the reader, Marcus the thinker, Marcus the dreamer, instead of Marcus the target. He described the way afternoon light slanted through the tall windows, how the silence felt different from the silence of isolation, how books opened doorways to places where being smart wasn't a crime punishable by loneliness. The submission deadline was February 15th, just 3 days away. Marcus had rewritten his ending 17 times, each version feeling inadequate to capture what he really wanted to say. How do you explain to people who have never been hungry that food tastes different when you've earned it? How do you make them understand that a library card can be more valuable than money when you're living paycheck to paycheck? At school, Jerome's campaign of casual cruelty continued with the persistence of seasonal weather. Just that morning, he had cornered Marcus by the water fountain, grabbing the notebook from his hands before Marcus could stop him. "What's this, Shakespeare?" Jerome had asked, flipping through pages covered in Marcus's careful handwriting. "You writing your memoirs already? The sad life of a book nerd. Give it back," Marcus had said quietly, his voice steady despite the panic rising in his chest. That notebook contained the rough draft of his story, not the final version, but close enough that losing it would mean starting over completely. Jerome held the notebook above his head, taking advantage of his 4-inch height advantage. "Maybe I should read some of this out loud. Let everyone know what you really think about Jefferson Middle School. Jerome, please." The word please tasted like copper in Marcus's mouth, like blood from a bitten tongue. He hated begging, hated the way it made him feel small and powerless. But that notebook represented months of work, hundreds of hours of carefully chosen words. Please what? Jerome's voice had carried the lazy confidence of someone who knew he held all the power in the exchange. "Please don't tell everyone that you think you're better than us. Please don't let them know that you're planning to get out of here and never look back." For a moment, the hallway had fallen silent, except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of someone's locker slamming shut. Marcus had looked into Jerome's eyes and seen something that surprised him. Not malice, exactly, but a kind of desperate fear. Jerome was smart enough to recognize intelligence in others, and smart enough to know that intelligence was often a ticket out of places like Jefferson Middle School. The cruelty wasn't random. It was protective, a way of keeping the dreamers from showing everyone else what they were missing. "I don't think I'm better than anyone," Marcus had said finally, his voice carrying a quiet dignity that made Jerome's smirk falter slightly. "I just think we all deserve better than this." Jerome had stared at him for a long moment, the notebook still held above his head like a trophy. Then inexplicably he had handed it back. "Whatever, man," he had muttered, walking away with his usual swagger. But Marcus had caught something different in his posture, a slumping of the shoulders that suggested the armor was heavier than it looked. Now, sitting at his desk with the final draft nearly complete, Marcus thought about that moment. In his story, He had tried to capture not just his own experience, but the experiences of all the Jerome Pattersons and Kevin Washingtons, the kids who had learned that it was safer to tear others down than to risk being torn down themselves. He had written about the way poverty could make people cruel, how fear could masquerade as strength, and how sometimes the bullies were just as trapped as their victims, just in different kinds of cages. His story ended with hope, not the easy kind that ignored reality, but the hard-earned kind that acknowledged darkness while still believing in dawn. He wrote about libraries as sanctuaries, about librarians as guardian angels, and about the power of words to build bridges across even the widest chasms of misunderstanding. At 12:23 a.m., Marcus wrote the final sentence of his story and set down his pen. 25 years later, Marcus Thompson stood before the gleaming glass facade of what had once been the Detroit Public Library's Central Branch, watching as workers carefully positioned the last bronze letter of the sign that would make this moment official: the Marcus Thompson Community Learning Center. The November wind still cut through downtown Detroit with the same sharpness he remembered from his childhood, but the city around him had transformed in ways that 13-year-old Marcus could never have imagined. At 38, Marcus had fulfilled every promise that bookish teenager had made to himself in those late-night writing sessions. His first novel, Sanctuary in the Stacks, an expanded version of the story that had won the Michigan Young Authors Competition, had become a bestseller and launched a career that now included 12 published books, a Pulitzer Prize nomination, and speaking engagements at universities across the country. But more importantly, it had provided him with the resources to give back to the community that had shaped him. The renovation had taken 3 years and cost $2.8 million, money Marcus had earned through his writing, speaking fees, and a foundation he had established after his third book hit the New York Times bestseller list. The old library had been gutted and rebuilt from the inside out, transformed into a state-of-the-art learning center that would serve not just as a repository for books, but as a comprehensive educational resource for Detroit's youth. "Marcus, the ceremony is about to begin," said Dr. Angela Foster, the center's newly appointed director. At 42, she was a former Detroit public school principal who had fought tirelessly for educational equity throughout her career. Marcus had recruited her personally, knowing that this project needed someone who understood both the community's needs and the bureaucratic challenges they would face. Marcus nodded, straightening his navy blue suit, tailored now, not the second-hand clothes of his youth, and walked toward the podium that had been set up on the library's front steps. The crowd gathered below was larger than he had expected. Former classmates, teachers, city officials, and dozens of young people from the surrounding neighborhoods. He could see news crews from local television stations, their cameras trained on him as he prepared to speak. But his eyes were drawn to two figures in the front row. His mother, Sandra Thompson Williams, now a registered nurse and recent retiree, wore the proud smile he remembered from his high school graduation. Beside her sat Mrs. Carmen Rodriguez, 73 years old now and officially retired, but still sharp as the day she had handed him that first composition notebook. Her hair was completely silver, and she walked with a cane, but her eyes still held the same warmth and intelligence that had recognized something special in a lonely teenager. "Friends, neighbors, and fellow Detroiters," Marcus began, his voice carrying easily across the crowd without the microphone. Years of public speaking had given him confidence, but standing here, he felt like that 13-year-old boy again, nervous, hopeful, and desperate to be understood. 25 years ago, I walked up these same steps every day after school, running from bullies and looking for a place where I could just be myself. He paused, scanning the crowd and recognizing faces from his past. There was Kevin Washington, now a successful electrician and father of 3, who had reconnected with Marcus through social media and apologized for the cruelty of their middle school years. Even Jerome Patterson was there, standing towards the back of the crowd. He had become a youth counselor after a stint in the military, working with at-risk teenagers in the same neighborhoods where they had grown up. "This building saved my life," Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger. "Not because it was fancy or modern. It wasn't. The ceiling leaked, the heating was unreliable, and half the computers didn't work. But it saved my life because one person who worked here saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. He looked directly at Mrs. Rodriguez, who had tears streaming down her cheeks. Mrs. Carmen Rodriguez didn't just hand me books. She handed me hope. She didn't just give me a quiet place to read. She gave me permission to dream bigger than my circumstances. And when I was ready to give up on myself, she refused to give up on me. The crowd erupted in applause, and Marcus waited for it to subside before continuing. But I'm not here today just to celebrate the past. I'm here because there are kids in this city right now who need what this building gave me. They need adults who believe in them. They need access to technology, to tutoring, to college preparation programs. They need to know that where they come from doesn't determine where they're going. Marcus gestured toward the building behind him, where he could see staff members preparing for the afternoon's activities, computer classes for seniors, homework help for elementary students, and a writing workshop for teenagers that he would lead personally every month when he was in town. The Marcus Thompson Community Learning Center isn't just a library, he said. It's a promise that every child who walks through these doors will find someone who believes in their potential. A promise that no kid will ever have to choose between being smart and being accepted. A promise that in Detroit, we don't just survive, we thrive. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Marcus found himself standing alone with Mrs. Rodriguez in the main reading room. The space had been completely modernized. New computers, comfortable seating areas, and climate control that actually worked. But it still felt like the sanctuary he remembered. "Do you think it will work, mijo?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked, using the nickname she had called him for over 2 decades. All of this. Marcus looked around the room, imagining it filled with young people discovering the same magic he had found here. "I think about that kid I used to be," he said quietly. Angry, scared, convinced that the world didn't have a place for someone like me. If I could go back and tell him that someday his name would be on this building, that he would have the power to change other kids' lives the way you changed his, he trailed off, overcome by the magnitude of the moment. Mrs. Rodriguez reached out and took his hand in both of hers, her skin soft and warm despite her age. "He wouldn't have believed you," she said with a gentle smile, "but he would have kept reading anyway. That's what dreamers do, Marcus. They keep believing even when belief seems impossible." Outside, Detroit was building itself back up, one dream at a time.